Donald Trump's defense secretary pick will not be ready on day one of the new administration. According to Politico, the Senate isn't expected to vote on Pete Hegseth's nomination until days after the inauguration, because the Democrats are raising red flags about his qualifications. During his confirmation hearing, Hegseth stumbled over several of their questions.
How many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations in that, but I know we have allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, and trying to work on submarines with them.
Mr. Hegseth, none of those countries are in ASEAN.
Across.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework.
Commanders meet quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted, and that disparages those women.
Commanders do not have to meet quotas for the infantry. Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry.
It is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years.
Joining us now, Allison Jaslow, an Iraq war veteran and former Army captain. She's CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America.
Allison, good morning to you. You and I spoke a lot in the lead up to this confirmation hearings about the concerns you had about Pete Hegseth, the questions you had for Pete Hegseth. Has any of that been remedied by what you saw during these confirmation hearings?
Alicia, thank you. You know, I would say that no, it hasn't been remedied. And also, I think some of the senators who were on the Armed Services Committee failed to show up and actually challenge him in the way that he deserved to be challenged as a part of that confirmation hearing.
Give me examples. Who are you talking about? What did you want to see?
I mean, listen,
yeah, name the names.
Yeah, I mean, you and I chatted about this when we were last together, Alicia. You know, Pete Hegseth, actively lobbied to get convicted war criminals pardoned. And these were men who were only convicted because men who served alongside of them, who experienced the same horrors of war on the same battlefield as them, felt like they crossed lines that we shouldn't cross. Mm. They risked their reputation in some instances, those who were Navy SEALs, but also had the courage to speak up and turn those men in. And, you know, I think if I was a senator, I would have asked Pete Hegseth what it says to those who had the courage to speak up about those war crimes, that he actively lobbied to get those war criminals pardoned. Mm. Like, does he not trust them? Does he not think that they were honest when they spoke up and shared what they saw? Does he not think that they have the judgment to know what is fair and what is even, you know, within the realm of what could be acceptable on a messy battlefield? You know, I've been to combat myself, and it is certainly difficult to navigate, especially today's battlefield that is so asymmetrical. But if these same men saw and had the judgment to say that these individuals crossed a line, you know, what it says to those men who had the courage to speak up, and in some cases, as I mentioned before, risk their careers to turn these war criminals in, I think it is really sad for me, actually, that he doesn't trust their word. And it's sad to me that we may be on the brink of elevating the Secretary of Defense, who will be overseeing the men and women in uniform who has those views.
Mm. You know, Allison, the way you just talked about it, this did come up in the hearing, but it wasn't as pointed as you just made it. And I think that, at least for me, I think you really just painted a very clear and stark picture, and I wish the American people would have gotten to hear that from the senators and have Pete Hegseth answer these questions during his confirmation hearing. What we did get from a number of senators on the committee, disproportionately only Democrats, were very pointed questions about Pete Hegseth and women serving in the military. Let's hear, there are a number of senators, Senator Warren, Gillibrand, and Senator Ernst, who questioned Pete Hegseth about women in military service. Take a listen.
These are your words from 10 weeks ago. Women absolutely straight up should not be permitted to serve in combat.
When I'm talking about that issue, It's not about the capabilities of men and women. It's about standards.
You said in your statement you don't want politics in the DOD. Everything you've said in these public statements is politics. I don't want women. I don't want moms. What's wrong with a mom, by the way?
As Secretary of Defense, will you support women continuing to have the opportunity to serve in combat roles?
Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high.
Some audacity talking about high standards.
I mean,
yeah, can you break down the standards? Because I'm trying to figure. I didn't think that there was a diminution of standards in our DOD under Biden, under Obama, under Bush. I've never heard that. So, to Simone's point, help us understand what he keeps talking about these standards. What standards is he referring to?
Well, the first thing I would say is, thankfully, Senator Gillibrand did actually show up really well in that hearing and challenged him on quotas, which don't exist. So it was nice to have her at least fact check in that instance. But what I think that viewers should know, actually, is when you see these women who are graduating from Ranger School, these women are objectively tougher, both in mind and body, than not just many civilian men, but many men in the military. Mm-hmm. Ranger School has a 50% dropout rate. Mm-hmm. So the women who are graduating not only are meeting the same standards as other men who are graduating Ranger School, but they are exceeding what many other men who are still going to be serving in the military are able to meet in terms of standards of, toughness and grit to be a special operator in the United States military. And listen, it would be a bad call, of course, for our readiness if we lowered standards. And so there's no way that's happening in the military right now. In fact, if you've followed the recruiting crisis at all, one of the things that's been hard to actually get recruits is to get people to meet the standards to even get into the military. So, of course, if the military is holding the line on even sending people to basic training and boot camp, that they're holding the line when it comes to standards inside the actual military itself.
See, Simone and Alicia, I think all of that standards crap was just total BS, because at the end of the day, he doesn't want women in the military. He's made very clear, Pete Hegseth has made very clear he doesn't think women can perform in the military and therefore does not want them in the military in the capacities that Allison just referenced. So, we can play dumb all day long. And senators, shame on you for not really drilling out that point and thoroughly exposing his BS. Because we have him on public record. So that's just how I look at it. But,
You have that piece about policy and expertise. And then, Allison, you simply have this history of alcoholism that Hegseth was confronted about. Take a listen to Senator Mark Kelly.
Memorial Day 2014, at a CVA event in Virginia, you needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated.
Senator, anonymous smears.
Just true or false? Very simple. Summer of 2014 in Cleveland, drunk in public with the CVA team.
Anonymous smears.
I'm just asking for true or false questions, true or false answers. An event in North Carolina, drunk in front of 3 young female staff members after you had instituted a no alcohol policy and then reversed it. True or false?
Anonymous smears.
Okay. So, Allison, putting aside the fact that under oath he was not able to just say no, not true, didn't happen, sort of reverted to this
he wasn't even under oath. That's the crazy part.
Okay.
Thank you, Simone.
So help me understand how a person who has coming into this with this baggage is supposed to lead an organization with the largest budget of any U.S. agency.
I mean, listen, we should all be concerned about the character of the next Secretary of Defense. I also think some individuals can evolve from the person who they were, before in some aspects. But as I noted earlier, I think a lot of, honestly, the background of Pete Hegseth is a distraction. a lot of the drama that apparently entails with him. And like what I would hope people would focus in on and what I wished that U.S. senators focused in on more on was that he seemingly thinks war crimes are okay. And he doesn't think that we should still adhere to the Geneva Conventions. He says so in his book. He was wishy-washy on it in the hearing this week, and that has serious implications, not just for our national security, but it puts our U.S. troops at risk. And that was not highlighted enough in the hearing this week. That is what should concern the American people the most as this heads to a confirmation vote. And, you know, we may have Pete Hegseth as the Secretary of Defense, but it has serious implications, again, as for our national security and also puts our troops at risk. And that is a problem.
Alison Jaslow, I appreciate your time. I also appreciate you reminding us what actually matters here and what cannot be chalked up to anonymous smears because, you know, you wrote it yourself in your own book. Alison Jaslow, thank you so much.